The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program for this week. Good to have you with us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie, Associate Pastor, Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and also Reverend Carl Zorowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church in Morehead City. And good day, gentlemen.
Good day, morning.
Ben. Let's talk about President Trump going to Warsaw, Poland. I mean, this was a very interesting stopover. It has long been considered a pretty safe place, especially for conservative presidents to go and be well received in Poland. And this is a nation that has gone through, obviously, and President Trump outlines that in his speech, have gone through so much in terms of oppression and comeback, et cetera. And in fact, you can actually, there's some critics now of their current government, but that wasn't the mission of President Trump to go to Poland before the G20 summit. He went there to talk about Western civilization and talk about what makes Western civilization great, and about how the Polish people triumphed in their desire to see Western civilization succeed. So I want to play one excerpt of his speech for us to comment on. And this is one I think we all remember from that speech.
And when the day came on June 2nd, 1979, and 1 million Poles gathered around Victory Square for their very first Mass with their Polish Pope, that day every communist in Warsaw must have known that their oppressive system would soon come crashing down. They must have known it at the exact moment during Pope John Paul II's sermon, when 1 million Polish men, women, and children suddenly raised their voices in a single prayer. 1 million Polish people did not ask for wealth. They did not ask for privilege. Instead, 1 million Poles sang 3 simple words: "We want God."
All right, there's more to that, obviously, but this is I think, a remarkable statement from an American president in that country. Robert, what was your reaction to that?
I thought it was brilliant, and whoever put that together, that speech together, that wrote that speech, and I'm sure he has speech writers that help him do this stuff. I mean, they tied this thing so concretely to reality instead of some utopian dream about what's coming. I mean, Trump's message was one of the facts, nothing but the facts, that Western civilization is the force. We were talking about worldview earlier, is the worldview that has pushed back the darkness of tyranny and totalitarianism around the world, and I was as speechless as I can be. I was struck speechless. I was gobsmacked, as the Brits say, by the boldness of that speech.
The National Review, in an article by David French, writes that Donald Trump struck a righteous blow against universalism, which I thought was a very interesting and telling thing. The subtitle was, it's a false ideology, a burden and a cancer on our body politic. It defines reality. They said that other presidents, including President Obama and President George W. Bush, would speak about universal values. Yet Donald Trump put it squarely into a Western context. Isn't that interesting, Carl? I think that's fascinating.
It is.
And it's the reality.
It is the reality. Being Well, with the last name Zarowski, I tend to, my ears perk up when I hear about visits of presidents to Poland and things like that, things that are going on there. What fascinates me about this speech that he made is I think back to, I guess it was the 1980s with the Solidarity movement in Poland. And we see this solidarity of the Polish people with this meeting with the Pope back in, I think it was 1979 that he said, where they said, we want God. That was where they found their unity, their solidarity. Doesn't matter what's going on around them, so long as they can all be united in one thing, then nothing's going to knock them down. And that solidarity they found in God. Now, as far as, is that what the Western culture looks like? Well, at one time, it did. Does it look like that now? I don't think so.
Right.
It's fascinating because it was hearkening back to, and that's what all the pushback that you read in the media and or on TV or whatever on the cable was that we're hearkening back to a bygone day, a world that doesn't exist anymore. And and it may not to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got competing worldviews here for sure, and that's why I threw that word utopian in there, which ties into that universalist position that mankind is going to somehow fix everything. That if we can just come together on these things, then we can fix it. And what he was referring back to was that actually it's our relationship with God where this stuff God fixes us.
Because the universalist appeal, the utopian appeal, is that man is essentially good.
Correct. Sin is just a education issue.
Yeah.
Right. You can educate people out of sin.
Or you can educate them into it.
Right. Well, and what he's saying here in this speech, and I don't know how deeply goes his understanding of this even, but what he's saying here in this speech, because of what the Polish people did was they rejected that universalist idea that man can fix it, and that was that the Soviets were going to fix things for them.
That's exactly right,
and everything was going to be fine. Instead, we want God because we know we're fallible.
Right. Leninism, Marxism eliminates God. Mm-hmm. God is not the agent of change. God, in fact, is irrelevant to the debate. And so they had lived under that oppression, and it is oppressive when the state is the one who is your source of everything. And yet, to this very day, we see people around the world who have forgotten all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. That this universe, utopian, humanitarian approach, or humanism approach, let's put it that way,
right.
Materialistic approach, is flawed. It's leaving out the most important thing. And that's why 1 million Poles cried out for God. We want God.
David French, in that article from the National Review, was being critical of Trump here because he was calling that speech, he was calling that lack of universalism racist. He was saying that this is taking that is discounting how other people feel.
Well, of course. And, if you're not following that kind of false, there's a true unity of humanity, which the Poles were crying out for. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned being unified around God, around the Creator, around the Sustainer.
That's our redemption.
Exactly. Yeah. This is our only hope, is in this relationship with this being that we call God. And if you eliminate that, then all you can do is negotiate on the horizontal. There's not the vertical. And then it's whoever. Then you get into why evolution is always linked into this, because it becomes the You know, the strong survive. It's the one who has the power is the one who leads the parade.
Right. And then the one who has the power is the one who determines for everybody else what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is evil. And without God, we can't have a world view on what is good and what is right.
That's
No,
right.
we're wrong to have it.
That's right. We are wrong to have it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, these universal truths that disappear.
That's right.
And it becomes, you know, that's why, you know, good friend of mine, Frank Turk, wrote a book called Stealing from God. And he's talking about the atheists and how they have to steal their moral code. You know, they deny the existence of God, but the only place they can really find the basis for the existence of a moral code is in God, is from God.
Right.
If there are moral laws, well, there has to be a moral law giver. Otherwise, it's everyone does what's
It's
right
all
in their own
relative.
understanding.
Yes.
That's what it breaks down to. And that's what communism, that's the fatal flaw of utopian communism, is that they lack the basis for a moral understanding.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie and Reverend Carl Zarowski. And we'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball from Broad Creek United Methodist Church. Also Reverend Robert Cornegie from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and Reverend Carl Zarowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church here. And as we deal with our next subject here, this is one that is just really kind of getting the notice in the American media. And from American media not only, but and the public as well. But it has been a pretty big story in Britain for a long time. It's about baby Charlie Gard. And he is a child who has is terminally ill and has been widely recognized as being terminally ill. And it's a very rare disorder. And we're not going to go into all of the parts of that right now, but part of that has been the parents' fight to not have him removed from life support and to have him instead transported to the United States for some experimental treatment that's being offered by a U.S. hospital, or the U.S. hospital has also offered that experimental treatment to be taken to him in the British hospital. But
Or in the Vatican as well. There's always also
the
been
Vatican has offered their services too, but the British hospital has maintained that there's nothing that can happen, nothing that can be gained. And that becomes the thrust of the story. Now, the latest on this is from CNN reporting that UK's High Court will reconvene on Thursday. Now, you're hearing this a few days after this happens, to hear new medical evidence in the case of baby Charlie Gard, whose parents are fighting doctors to keep him on life support so they can take him to the U.S. Charlie's parents will have until Wednesday to submit new written evidence regarding the viability of having Charlie treated abroad with experimental nucleoside therapy, it's called. Now, really, the story for us here on Faith Matters isn't so much about whether or not that should happen, that this experimental treatment should be offered, etc., but what is the role of the hospital and by its nature in the British system, the government, in saying what can happen with this child and who gets to proceed with the either caring for him. And Carl, listen to this. I think that probably because this is just coming to light in the U.S., the U.S. public, the American public, probably doesn't get this because we don't have that kind of medical system, at least not yet. Not quite.
No, we don't. It's a question of, like you said, who gets to make the decisions for this little child, and in a lot of ways, it's who gets to make the decisions for the parents. You know, does the is the child still viewed by the hospital and the administrators there as a human life that has some value, or is this a particular folder on the desk that's a little bit troublesome? I don't think they look at it quite that callously. Okay, I hope they don't look at it that callously.
Seem to be, no.
But the fact is, we're talking about a baby. We're talking about a human life, and I think that the parents should have more say in what happens to their child than what they're having here.
Yeah,
Robert, you had said during the break, and I think it was actually a good phrase to say, "Who owns this child?"
Right.
Yeah,
Who
that's
owns
it.
this child?
Right. Who is the one? Where does the buck stop? If you want to put it, in American lingo.
That's right. Yeah.
Where does the buck stop? And this hospital, the Greater Ormond Street Hospital, is a world famous hospital for pediatric care, and it's a private hospital that is funded primarily through donations and whatnot. It is associated with the British healthcare system, but it's a fairly rare, and it's where all the really hard cases go, and they come from all over. And I have a nephew whose child has spent most of the child's life in that hospital with a very rare disease, and has progressed out.
So that helps us to understand the bona fides of this.
Exactly.
This hospital,
so these are experts, medical experts in the technical sense of medicine.
Mm-hmm. And that's an important distinction.
And so they have basically said, we've done everything that on earth that can be done. We've the resources, we've done everything we can do. And they reach a point, there is a point where hope is lost. Mm-hmm. And so they have lost hope for this child because they have the
doctors, not the
parents,
doctors.
Yeah. They have no tools left. But the parents
yes,
are obviously desperately seeking hope. And there is a door, and it's just a tiny little crack that there may be a treatment that's not available there that could experimental. There's no guarantees, but there's hope.
In fact, just on the factual side of the story, there's no guarantee that this hospital in New York could even provide that treatment in the United States because it's not FDA approved. They'd have to have emergency approval to do that. Now, but these parents who obviously have been dependent on the largesse of these donations and everything, they've also raised separate money to be able to go.
1.3 million pounds, which is a whole lot of bucks.
Yeah, to be able to go to the U.S. and take this child.
Yeah.
The question is, whose custody is
Well,
this
that's
child?
exactly right. And see, this is why Americans should be paying attention to this. Because the British system of health is a single-payer system. You hear these terms. See, we're not even familiar with what that means. What is a single-payer system? I mean, right now we have insurance companies. We have
multiple pots.
Yeah, it's not a single payer. Single payer is when the government is single payer is the VA health system. Mm-hmm. That's what that is.
Taxpayer supported.
Taxpayer supported. The government regulates it, and it's regulated by the government. And within the regulation of the government they don't call it this. It was a political thing several elections ago of the death panels. Mm-hmm. But here at the hospital we have a tumor panel, if you will. There's a committee that meets and talks about on the cancer side. Well, just in the British system, they have the same thing, but and in all single payer systems, there's a place where the buck stops, and it takes precedent over what the parents want.
And it is a dollar that stops.
It is a financial decision. Mm-hmm. So I mean, they have Ormond Street has, in their reckoning, has gone the extra mile, has done everything they can do.
It sounds like from your own experience, that's probably
exhausted
true.
Every opportunity,
Yeah.
and anything beyond that point is just a waste of resources. And their kids, parents trying to get their kids into that place, and they're taking a bed.
Carl, I think that brings up the key point here too. Is that allocation of resources? As Christians, should we have to pay attention to allocation of resources? Do we do that, or we do that just out of mercy and grace? We'll go to any length for those resources.
Gosh,
I give you the hard question.
Yeah, that's what happens for sitting in this chair. Right?
Can I just interject one thing?
Yeah.
Please.
Before you answer that question, I was listening to C-SPAN yesterday, and there was a discussion about war. Mm-hmm. And who the right of who can declare war, and it was a debate between whether it's within the executive or it's Congress and all of that. The Constitution. What does the Constitution say?
Well, only Congress.
And there's been a bill proposed by Franken that before there can be a declaration of war, there has to be a financial estimate given of how much it's going to cost benefit analysis of how much it costs to go to war.
The CBO has to score it.
Oh gosh!
Look, and that's what we're doing right now, isn't it, with the health program?
Yeah,
it's an economic decision. Well, and the just to help you on this a little bit, the consensus of the panel was no. If you're going to war and you're having to look at the economic side of it, then you should not be going to war. I mean, that's not a factor because you're talking life and death in this stuff.
Or existence.
Well, when it comes to resources, Dr. Paul Farmer once said, God has given us more than enough to take care of everybody, but it's up to us to dole it out.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Yeah, cattle on 1,000 hills, riches and glory.
But we have to remember the value of a human life.
That's it.
And that's what makes this particular story so sticky.
And here, as we talk about, we're talking about universalism before. It says, is there a universal value to that life, or does the parent get to determine whether or not those resources are allocated, if it's their resources or the government's?
Well, the government's going to eliminate the God factor in the first place. So that's not even going to be in the mix.
And that changes the value.
That's the calculus.
Picture.
They've taken that out
of the value of the life picture.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So you've got a warped system just to begin with. From a Christian point of view, we can't rely on, we have to have our own set of values that are God-based. And then we can start making these calls. But until we do that, it's a slippery slope.
Well, our prayers go out to this family and to this child because that's really where we start, right? Right. We call on God and His mercy to be involved in this, and perhaps we'll see how that goes. Even by the time you hear this, you may have had a different decision on that. We'll have more on Faith Matters coming up in a moment. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, and pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church. Also, Reverend Robert Cornegie from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and Reverend Carl Zarowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church. And we have another story here. This is one that, once again, we are on this topic, and probably will always be. It comes from ChristianHeadlines.com. From Sweden, pastors told they cannot refuse to marry same-sex couples. The Swedish government has told the Church of Sweden that ministers cannot refuse to marry same-sex couples. The Christian Institute reports that Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven announced that ministers of the Church of Sweden should be required to marry same-sex couples regardless of their opinions on homosexuality and gay marriage. Now, apparently this is, gay marriage has been illegal in Sweden for a while, and it's sort of, the church is sort of laid low on that subject. And while while it's not apparently mandatory, it has been. You have the prime minister saying, yeah, they ought to do that, and so it's probably not long before it's edict. Sweden embraced the legalized gay marriage in 2009, but the church has been much more cautious to fully embrace it, according to this article. Acceptance of gay marriage in churches around Europe is growing. At the end of May, as ChristianHeadlines.com previously reported, the Church of Scotland voted to ordain ministers who were in same-sex marriages. Now, once again, we talked about something in Europe and being in Britain that is different from the United States, something that we have to kind of, through the lens, understand here, Robert, is that these are places that have state churches.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It's a little different animal.
Yeah, that's right. And so that when you pay your taxes, a percentage of your taxes that you pay in these countries goes to the church, to the work of the church. And in fact, the Church of I'm not sure about how it is in Church of England, but in the Church of in Germany,
Sweden and Norway,
and Sweden and others, the priests or pastors are actually paid from the state. Mm-hmm. They are state employees, and so
they submit their budgets.
Now this is the
for money.
state church.
Right.
Now there are lots of churches in these areas that are not state churches. It's just the state church that does this. And so if you're a taxpayer, if you're a citizen of those countries, you're a member of the state church. Now, there has been lately some pushback on that, and some people are declaring themselves independent, and they don't want to. They're part of their taxes taken and given to the work of the church.
Yeah, how's that working?
Yeah, but when I was with Mercy Ships, and I worked in Europe for a number of years, and a lot of our grants that we applied for were to the state government. They were religious funds, but you had to go through the bureaucracy of the state and jump through all those hoops to get the funding to be able. You didn't go to the church; you went to the state.
Right.
And so, they're talking specifically about the state church there in Sweden. And so, look, I mean, they're Pentecostal, they're Baptist, there's Methodist, I assume, there's all other flavors there, but we're talking specifically about that.
Yes, but you said right. It's by default you're a member of the state church until you say otherwise. Right?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's the background here. But in the meantime, the curious part is, though, is this going to be is this the nose under the camel's tent, as we've said for many years? Is this how the movement is going to, again, make its way across all churches, is by declaring that you'll have to do it one way or another?
Well, it very well could. You think in this country we don't have the state church. But I could see, and this is not my view at all, but I could see people saying, well, since the church is not paying taxes, then the taxes I'm paying are helping the church, because I'm paying the church's share. So therefore, the church is being supported by the government. Therefore, the government ought to be allowed to tell the church what to teach and what to do. I could see that happening.
Oh, it's already.
It's not
certainly the argument.
Certainly not my view of how things should be. When I first read this article, I said, "Well, this is terrible that they're telling the pastors what they have to do." But then I saw it was the state church, and as you said, they're paid by the government. Therefore, they are government employees. Therefore, if the government says this is the way you have to do your job, then that's the way you have to do your job. And just was it last week that the courts in North Carolina decided that the magistrates, state magistrates, are not required to conduct a gay marriage if that conflicts with your religious views?
Yeah, on that, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed a lawsuit rejecting arguments by couples that their status as North Carolina taxpayers gives them standing to sue. Because two of the couples are already married and a third is engaged, the law hasn't hurt their ability to wed. The judges said they weren't harmed, in other words. But well, that's a matter of time.
Yeah. And see, here's the thing. I could argue either side of that particular case, okay? Because, if I felt that gay marriage was against my beliefs, then, and I was working as a magistrate, I wouldn't want to have to do that. Okay. However, if I'm working for the government and the government says this is the way that things are, well, I can understand my having to do that then.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that here in the States we still have a few firewalls up between the big debate. Is there a separation between church and state?
Right.
And a lot of Christians say there isn't, but there is built into the system.
Right.
And the purpose was to protect the church from the encroachment of the state.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. That
Right.
was the entire purpose of
Right.
it. And so built into the Constitution, the freedom of religion, not just freedom of worship stuff. We keep coming back to this. And this is why this is going to be a perennial discussion. It's going to go on forever and ever because the state's modus of operandi, however you say that, they're the way they work is to control more and more and more of the society.
Right.
And and the whole purpose of the church is to say, this is not under your authority. This is God's authority, domain.
Right.
And therefore, there are limitations. It's not 100%. It's not a bright line. But there are limitations on what the state can do. And now the state, in the United States, by offering these tax exemptions, is the kind of weak point in the argument, because that is the camel's nose under the tent. Whereas in Sweden, the camel is drinking out of the baptismal font right now. I mean, it's in the church. And so it's a different situation altogether.
Do you foresee? I mean, obviously, we've already outlined what some of the arguments are. I mean, the argument has already been made in court that as a taxpayer, I feel like I ought to have a say in this. So that's going to be. I mean, it's just a matter of finding the right case.
Correct.
And to see where this goes.
Yeah.
And the other thing that people need to realize is that I see a big difference between a marriage that happens in a magistrate's office and a marriage that happens in the church. The church is a religious ceremony. It is an acknowledgement of God's part there, bringing those two people together, and there being this union of man, woman, and God. Okay, but in the magistrate's office, while those approaching may view that as being religious in nature, all that's happening there is legal documents are getting signed.
Yeah. It's a contract,
and it's done. It's a contract. Sure.
Correct. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to take away anything from anyone who chooses to go that route for a marriage.
Right.
Okay. But if you're a Christian and God being a part of your new union matters, then you ought to be getting married in a church.
Well, for example, and the usefulness of it, I've participated in. There are people that wanted to have maybe a particular. Well, you were in this role too. A particular minister to preside over their wedding, but was not allowed to do that. Under their particular constraints. So they go get married at the magistrate, and then they come back and have a religious ceremony to honor God. In that process. So
I just did one of those.
There's a service for
and
that.
I've done that
where
too.
they were married in Germany in a civil service, before a government official, and then they came here and they had a blessing of their marriage.
Well, it's the difference of holy matrimony and a marriage contract.
Exactly.
Correct.
And so they're two different things. But when you're in Sweden,
Yeah.
I don't know if you say it, what you say at the end, by the power vested in me, by the state of North Carolina.
I don't say that.
You don't say that?
No.
No, you don't use that bit right there. There are a lot of pastors that do.
Sure.
Use that as well
That's
as
the traditional phrasing. Yeah.
it is, isn't it? But I don't use it either. But, it's because to me, real marriage is before God and with God.
And that power is vested there.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah. You may have to sign the license and make sure it gets delivered to the clerk, but the power is not in the
That's
license.
bookkeeping as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, this is also the argument over civil unions versus holy matrimony, which is what should be allowed and permitted, and there's a lot of I think there's good argument to be made where people who want to live together need to have that kind of protection that the state affords, in some fashion or another. So, but it's not holy matrimony. There's a difference. There's a distinction, and we should keep that distinction.
Well, I've heard people say, that the word marriage, belonged to the church for so long, and now all of a sudden it doesn't seem like it does. All right. Well, maybe we just need to stop using that term and start using the term holy matrimony. I mean, that's the terminology we use in the liturgy of the service.
Mm-hmm. More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I think we should name this last segment the Sign of the Apocalypse. I don't know, maybe we've reached that point already. But this one is one that just kind of blew me out of the water, and just not quite sure how to handle this and understand it. In fact, the article I sent y'all, it was a different one from the first one that came to me. So this one is from a supposedly neutral source on this, from CBC News out of Canada and British Columbia. Parents fight to omit gender on BC, British Columbia, child's birth certificate. A parent in BC's Slocum Valley is fighting to omit their child's sex on their birth certificate as part of a broader effort to keep gender from being included on government documents. Corey Doty gave birth to, is it Cyril? Cyril? How do you say the name? Cyril Atlee. Cyril Atlee. We'll say it that way, but it does seem surreal. At a friend's home last November, Doty, a non-binary trans parent who doesn't identify as either male or female and prefers to use the pronoun they, wants to keep Cyril's gender off all official records. I'm raising Cyril in such a way that until they have a sense of self and command of vocabulary to tell me who they are, I'm recognizing them as a baby and trying to give them all the love and support to be the most whole person that they can be, outside of restrictions that come with the boy box and the girl box, Doty said. That's where we are, Robert.
It's a brave new world.
Yes.
Brave new world.
I think it's a cowardly new world.
Oh, this is so trendy. This is the latest and greatest fad, is who can out trans the next person. And I love that. They're called transparents. What? So anyway, I'm sorry. I can't. It's really hard for me to take this seriously.
Well, this does go back to really when our openings we started to talk about universalism. I mean, this goes back to that idea that being a male or female is a sin in and of itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's a cultural construct. Yeah. See, this is the ideas have consequences. Mm-hmm. This is postmodernism on steroids. So the idea of postmodernism is that there are no, Christians believe that truth consists of reason and revelation.
Right.
Both. The secularists, the materialist, the modernist believes that it's only reason. And now we're into postmodernity. Postmoderns believe there is no truth. There's just nothing.
It's only my reason.
It's whatever you think. And so therefore, it doesn't matter your biological package that you have or your actual.
Careful.
Anyway, I'm trying to be real careful with this. But that doesn't matter. It's what you think or who you think you are.
Okay, let's look at how this is infiltrated even in this whole article. According to Doty's lawyer, Barbara Finley, by the way, no capitals used in that. Barbara Finley.
Lowercase.
Yeah, lowercase, who doesn't spell her name with capital letters.
This is the attorney?
Yes. BC birth certificates currently only accommodate a male or female gender designation. What they want is to have a U for unassigned or undetermined. Some provinces like Ontario and Alberta are currently reviewing their policies to include a third non-binary gender option on the documents. We have seen now, actually in some places, I think even that you're looking at multiple options for that.
I just
up in
heard
the dozens.
In New York City, supposedly, somebody was just saying this yesterday. I heard it, that there are over 40 different gender selections. When you apply for a job with the New York City, you can pick one of 40.
It sounds like a dartboard. Just throw a dart, be whatever it shows up as. You can
be all that you can be.
Be all that you can be. There you go. I don't think that was the New York motto there for that. But
I don't think so.
As for any concerns about Cyril's ability to acquire other government documents that also require gender designation, like a passport or driver's license, Doty says that other groups are working towards changing those as well. Currently, countries like Australia, Pakistan, Nepal, and Canada are working towards creating a new gender designation for passports. Doty doesn't think adding a third option is ideal, but says it's a viable alternative to giving international challenges. I don't know what the option would not be then. Because so then you, on a passport, it's supposed to reveal your identity. So identity now is fluid.
Fluid identity.
Well,
You're getting a headache over there, Carl.
one of the things that that Doty has said is that a third non-binary gender option on a form can single out those who use them and can make them targets of discrimination and hate crimes. Okay, so here is this parent who does not want to identify as a man or a woman, who has just physically had a child. Okay, the child physically is either a boy or a girl. I don't know what the child's going to grow up and decide they want to be. But right now, the way they were, when the baby is born, what does the doctor do? Say, it's a human. Is that what the doctor, are the doctors going to get in trouble now for saying it's a boy or it's a girl? But now this parent is saying, if you call them something other than boy or girl on their form, it's going to single them out from everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay. But yet, I'm all over all this press I'm getting right now about my new non-binary baby that's going to get to grow up to have better choices and a better life than anybody else in the world.
Let me go back to the basic idea here, is that I think the basic idea of this person and their lowercase attorney is that it's that gender is irrelevant.
It should not be a factor in identity.
Should not be a factor in identity. Yeah, right. So what's next? Is you put is hair color a factor in identity? Skin color a factor in identity? Eye color is height.
All of those, everything can be changed.
Height, weight.
Everything can be changed except your chromosomes. That's what they're missing the point on this, is that all that we're talking about is external features. And yeah, you can go in medically or chemically or whatever you want to do. You can change some of the externals, but you cannot change the internal. A male has an X chromosome that a female, is that right?
No. So
it's the other way around, a Y.
I don't know.
Yeah, I shouldn't talk about it. I'm
right.
I'm a geneticist only because I stayed at the Holiday Inn last night. I played one on TV.
Now here's the story. What we're denying is not that gender should not be used in a discriminatory way. We're not denying that's wrong to do that. What is being denied here is that God has created a person. And that person has attributes.
Correct.
And that those attributes somehow are faulty because God created them. That's the claim. here.
Yes, that's right.
Is that they're faulty because they were created that way.
Well, and that going back to the postmodernism thing, that is a creation of culture. That's an imposition of a cultural perspective. And so that what you have to do is deconstruct the cultural standards so that you can be, because they're oppressive. Culture is oppressive. And so
I'm going to give them 1 point. There may be many forms where gender is irrelevant. That might be true.
Sure.
That might be true. It's same way with Social Security numbers. I mean, there's many forms where they're irrelevant. That they used to be on everything. Used to be on your checks. And so maybe there's a point there that it may be irrelevant. But when it's identity, it's not.
Isn't it fascinating that Paul said, that in Christ there is no male, female, free, slave.
Oh, so
Jewish.
As long as your identity says Christian, you're okay then.
Yeah, that's it. Well, he's speaking metaphorically about that. In Christ, we are of equal value.
Right.
Our value is not based upon our
Precisely.
external
Yes.
stuff. Our value is based upon that we are image bearers of the Creator of all things, the Almighty, and He has created us, and that's where we get our identity, not from this other stuff. And that's the problem we're having in the church now, is that we, and as long as you're outside of the church, you can't have that unity of the Spirit, the bond of peace that comes through the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ. That's the unity in Christ, is that our new identity in Him.
Robert, Carl, thanks for joining us here today, and we'll see you next week on Faith Matters.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.